Hi. Thank you for streaming one of our latest messages here at Mountain Lake Church. We hope you enjoyed the message. Please come back again very, very soon. We know that life change stories happen. They happen every day. And at Mountain Lake Church, we want to hear about your life change story. If you'd like to share your story, please visit us at mountainlake.tv and click on the story button. You can also find service locations as well as times. And if you can't come to see us in person, please know that we stream our services every Sunday at 9, 10:30, and noon. We look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Like I said, we're starting a brand new series today called More Life Change, and it's through the month of August. And the heartbeat of our church is we love to see Jesus change lives. We love to see people that were broken and messed up, and marriages that were on the edge of divorce, and we love to see Jesus restore them. We love to see people that were had addictions that control them, and then Jesus comes in, and now they're set free. And so this whole month, we're celebrating and talking about more life change. And if you think about it, the truth of the matter is whether you're a church person or not, or whether you consider yourself a follower of Jesus or not, everybody wants their lives to be changed. I mean, that's how books are sold and movies are sold and self-help gurus do their conferences. People want to be different, want to be better. I mean, I have yet to meet a person in life where they go, you know what, I don't want to change, I don't want to grow, I don't want to be better, I just want to live out my life the way it is and don't ever want to change about anything. I mean, you talk to people want life change, and it's on movies and books and television shows. And a couple of years ago, I was getting a haircut, and I was sitting in the barber chair, and it was in the afternoon. The barber was working on the hair, and they had the television on. And it was afternoons. They had one of those afternoon daytime talk shows on. And I think it was Dr. Oz, and he was up there and he was talking. And on his show, he had one of these self-help gurus, wrote a book, and she could fix anyone and everything. So he's talking to her about that. And then Dr. Oz, he goes, well, we've got somebody up here that she's going to help. And he stands up and he goes, now this lady, she is 50 pounds overweight. She hasn't had a date in 4 years. She's recently lost her job, and she's struggling financially. Please welcome to the show, so-and-so. And he says her name, and like everybody applauds awkwardly, and this lady walks out and just looks like the weight of the world is on her shoulders. I mean, her dirty laundry just got read before everybody on the television audience and whoever's watching that show, and she sits down, and it's her and Dr. Oz and this other lady, and the self-help guru, she starts talking and everything and talking about her book. And then like her big moment, like where the show had been building and this was the big crescendo, the lady looks at the other lady who's kind of just, down, and she goes, you've just got to do better. And the lady, she goes, you've just got to fix yourself, and you've just got to do better. And everybody applauds, and then this lady gets up and walks out. And I remember sitting there, and I wanted to jump out of the barber chair and go, no, you missed it. But the lady was working on my sideburn. I thought she'd go, zzz, and I would have one up here and down here. So I controlled myself, but I thought to myself, this poor lady, she just had her entire dirty laundry aired out for all to listen to. And this big moment was, you've just got to do better. And you've just got to fix you. And I thought to myself, if she could just do better, if she could just fix herself, then there would be no need for her to be on the show in the first place. Life change, we all want it, and how we get that life change is very, very important to understand. And all of us, honestly, find ourselves on either side of a life change story. And so let me demonstrate it this way. And so on this side, there's people that are in need of a life change story. And their phrase usually begins with, I was. I was confused. I was anxious. I was fearful. I was on the edge of divorce. I was addicted. I was in need of a life change. And so they're on this side of the story. Then for many of us in this room, we're on this side of the story, and we have experienced a life change. And this phrase starts with, now I am. Now I am free from the addiction. Now our marriage is better and healthier than others. Now I do have peace. Now I do have comfort. Now I do have hope. And so all of us find ourselves on either side of a life change story with either I was or now I am. And what's so very important to understand and to make sure that you have right in your life is what's in the middle of that change. What was the catalyst of that change? What caused you to go from I was to now I am? Because what is in the middle and what caused that change is what will determine how great that change is and how impactful that change is in your life, in your marriage, in your business, with your kids, with your family. And we're going to look at a story of a man who had a life change moment. I mean, it's about as big a contrast as you can imagine, physically speaking, in this man's life. And he has this moment of change, and Jesus changed his life in a very unique and peculiar way. And then this man's response from the people in his life, friends, family, the religious people, it was less than great. In fact, it was so less than great, it becomes very humorous as this story goes on. And then Jesus circles back to have a final conversation with this man. And so I want us to understand what should be in the middle of our life change story. Whether we need one or whether we receive one, what's in the middle is what will cause how big of an impact that life change is. So with all that in mind, if you've got a Bible, I need you to grab it. If not, it'll be up on the screen. Don't worry about it. I need you to go to John chapter 9. John chapter 9. And it's the story of a man who was born blind. He was a blind beggar, and he had been blind since birth. The disciples were walking along and asked Jesus, why is this man blind? Is it a sin of his fault or sin of his parents? Whose fault is it? And Jesus looks at him and he goes, he was born blind so that God could get the glory. And then Jesus heals this man in a very unusual way. And look what happens. John chapter 9, starting in verse 6. It says, then he, meaning Jesus, spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. That was this was that moment. And this is a huge moment in this man's life. For his entire life, it had been dark, could not see a thing. And he's sitting there, Jesus comes along, and all of a sudden he hears this. And then the next thing he knows, there's mud being put on his eyes. And he's going, well, how did mud get, well, I don't remember a mud pile there. Don't ask, dude, just don't ask. And then he hears the voice of Jesus saying, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. And so he does, and he comes back seeing. For the very first time in his entire life, he can see the sky and the trees and the lake and the flowers and human beings and the city. I mean, this is the best day of his entire life. He goes from pure blackness and not being able to see anything and everything's just dark to I can see everything. But then the response that he receives is less than great. Look at verse 8. The first group he runs into is his neighbors. Verse 8, his neighbors and others who knew him as the blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I'm the same one. So he comes back and people go, hey, isn't that the guy that used to sit there and beg? No, he looks a lot like him. Maybe he has a twin. And he goes, no, guys, it's me. I can see you now for the very first time. And then he goes from the neighbors to the Pharisees, the religious leaders. Verse 10 says they asked, who healed you and what happened? And he told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I washed and now I can see. Well, where is he now? They asked. And I don't know, he replied. And then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it. So he told them, he put the mud over my eyes and when I washed it away, I could see. And there's this moment where his life is forever changed. The neighbors don't really believe it or understand it, and they take him to the Pharisees. They don't really get it or understand it, and so now he gets brought before his parents. His parents that had known him since he was born and he was blind, they had watched him grow up from adolescence to teenage years to full-grown adult as a man who's been begging. They bring him before his parents. And at this moment you go, the parents have got to be thrilled to death. They've got to embrace him. And look what happens in verse 20. Verse 20 says this. His parents replied, well, we know this is our son, and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who would announce that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he's old enough, ask him. I mean, you got to get the irony in this. I mean, this is the guy who's been sitting there. He's been blind since he was born. He's begging and begging. All of a sudden he can see. His neighbors go, I'm not sure this is the same guy. He kind of looks like him. The Pharisees don't believe him. Mom, Dad, it's me. Whoa. Ask him. Now, here's what's crazy. I mean, if you put yourself in his shoes and this was your moment to go in from pitch darkness to you can see, and not a single person says, congratulations. No one. No one says, congratulations, let's go look at the mountains, let's go look at the streams. Nobody believes them because they can't explain it in their own mind. And then the conversation takes an interesting turn. He goes from this blind beggar who would sit there all day long and eke by a meager existence. Now all of a sudden, he becomes bold and a bit sarcastic. Look at verse 24. Says, so for the second time, they called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man is a sinner. Verse 25, he says, I don't know whether he was a sinner, the man replied, but I know this. I was blind and now I can see. I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know if it was some crazy magic mud. I'm not sure how it worked. Mom, Dad, I know you don't really want to associate with me. Neighbors and friends, I know you don't really recognize me. Pharisees, religious leaders, I know it doesn't fit in your box, but here's what I do know. This morning I was blind. Jesus comes along, and now I can see. Now, how that fits in your box, I'm not quite sure. And then the conversation takes a little bit more stronger tone. Look at verse 26. But what did he do, they asked, and how did he heal you? Look, the man exclaimed, I told you once, didn't you listen? I'm telling you, you go from being blind to now you can see, you get kind of bold. And he goes, didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? You get the sarcastic tone. Well, explain it. Listen, fellas, you're asking a lot of questions. Maybe you want to be one of his disciples too. And all of a sudden, that burns them. Look what they did. Verse 28. Then they cursed him and said, you're his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. The religious people curse at the man that was blind. I mean, can you imagine somebody coming in here and going, Jesus changed me, I was this and now I'm this, and all of a sudden we begin to curse at him? What in the world, how blankety blank this and that, and you can imagine this man going, man, this was way more complicated now that I can see everybody. Verse 30, again he goes, why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes and yet you don't know where he comes from? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he's ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. And he reasons in his own mind for them. Listen, guys, I wasn't faking blindness. I wasn't doing that my whole life. I really couldn't see, and now I can. And the only way this could happen is if Jesus was the Son of God. That's the only way I go from I was blind to now I see. The only way that could happen is Jesus being the Son of God. And look what happens as they finish it up. Verse 34. 34 says, you were born a total sinner, they answered. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. They throw him out because they can't explain it. They can't put it in their own box. Well, this is how this happened. His parents rejected him. You talk to him, we're kind of afraid of our lives. His neighbors don't get it. They question everything. They don't really believe him. And this poor man who should be celebrating the greatest day of his life is thrown out of the synagogue. The religious institution, his family, and his neighbors and friends have nothing to do with him because they can't explain it. And then Jesus circles back around. Look what happens. Verse 35. When Jesus heard what had happened, he found the man and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answered, "Who is he, sir? I want to believe in him." Jesus circles back. Now, no, don't miss this. He had not seen Jesus. He had only heard Jesus. Jesus put the mud on his eyes and says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." He does. Jesus slips away. He goes and he comes back and he knows it's Jesus. He's heard the name, but he hadn't seen Jesus. And if you don't think Jesus is already cool enough in your book, look at this very next verse. And this is the coolest thing Jesus could have said. Look at verse 37. Verse 37, he says this to the man. "You have seen him." You have seen him. Now this morning you couldn't have, but you're staring at the man who healed you. Jesus said, and he is speaking to you. Verse 38, "Yes, Lord, I believe," the man said, and he worshiped Jesus. "We don't believe you. We don't want anything to do with you. We'll curse at you and throw you out of the synagogue." Jesus comes back, circles back around and says, "Do you want to believe in the Son of Man, the Messiah?" "Yes, I do." And he goes, "You have seen him and he's speaking to you." And the man goes, "I believe." And here's what I want you to grasp and what I want you to get, especially if you're on this side of needing a life change story. What I want you to get and grasp with your entire heart and mind is this, is that no one can write a better life change story than Jesus can. And no one can write your life change story better than Jesus can. You can try everything else. You can try money, you can try work, you can try popularity, you can try social media, you can try everything else. And maybe you get a little temporary relief, maybe it's a little bit, but no one can change your life better and greater and with more impact than Jesus can. And there's some point in your life where you have to decide, I need Jesus. And when Jesus speaks to him and he goes, you're staring at him, the blind man says, I believe. Not we believe, not it's a group thing, not I've got a small group that I meet with on Sunday nights, let's converse and we'll make sure we're all together. He goes, I believe. Regardless of what my parents say, regardless of what my friends say, regardless of what the institutional religious leaders say, Jesus, I believe in you. And at some point in your life and in your mind and your heart, you've got to wrestle to the ground, I need Jesus. The problem is you live in the South and you attend church in the South. And I'm not sure if you know this or not, but here in the South, going to church, we've got to make sure everything is nice and prim and proper. And we love to walk in with that happy church face smile and everything's good and everything's perfect and I don't have any issues or any problems. And on the inside, your life is a wreck. Your marriage is a mess. You have no purpose. You're a workaholic. You're addicted to pain pills. You're addicted to alcohol. You're addicted to pornography. You're a mess. But on the outside, it's Sunday at 10:30. We look good. I got a cup of coffee. My kids are back there taken care of. And we put on the happy church face. And you go pick up your kids and you go home and you go through the same issue going, why didn't anything change? Because there's got to be a moment where you go, I can do nothing else unless Jesus steps into my life. There's no greater author of your life change story than Jesus. The question is, will you allow him into your life? And the truth is, in this room, all of us either were a mess or currently are a mess. I'm not sure if you know that or not, but if you look around, you go, man, there's some really pretty, perfect people. No, they're not. They're faking it. They are. In fact, do me a favor. Look at your neighbor and go, man, you're a mess. Go ahead. You're a mess. Now look at the other. I may be, but not as big as you are. Yeah. I'm a mess. You're a mess. But on the outside, it all looks good. And at some point, we got to go, Jesus, I need you. It's individually. It's not a group thing. It's not a church thing. It's not what the preacher says on stage. It's going, Jesus, if you don't come in, if you don't live, if you aren't the center of my life, nothing is going to change. In my lifetime, I have successfully run and completed 2 triathlons in my life. Now, no, don't, because they were awful experiences, both of them. Horrible experiences. The first one was bad enough, or whatever, I punished myself and did a second one. And it was the shortest triathlon I could, it was like in a kiddie pool, and then I could. So we did the swim, bike, run. Did the swim, and the problem is on these triathlons, we had gone down to the beach the week before on vacation, and I'd eaten a lot of fried shrimp. Not good before you run a triathlon. But anyway, so I ran a triathlon, swim, and I'm on the bike. And I had borrowed this guy's bike because I quit riding bikes when I turned 16 and got a license. And so I just, I know some of you do that, but I'd riding this bike, and I'm hating life, probably not saying holy things in my mind. I'm just riding. And I remember this moment where I'm riding in this race, all these bikers and everything. I'm riding, I'm really paying attention. And the next thing I know, I look around, and I'm all by myself. All by myself. And my first thought was going, I'm really ahead of everybody? Like, I'm winning this thing. And then I go, well, no, maybe I'm losing this thing. And I'm going, where is everybody? And I'm looking around, and I look back, and back about 200 or 300 yards, the course had taken a sharp left, and everybody had gone left, and your idiot pastor kept driving straight. But here's the thing, and here's what kind of blew my mind. There were race officials on the course. There were race officials on the course telling everybody to go left. Old Chris comes along, and they go, right this way, sir. And nobody said anything. And Brianna, she goes, well, maybe they thought like you lived in the neighborhood and got caught in the race by accident. I was like, oh, he must be down the street. So go ahead, Chris. And so, but there was that moment where I had to realize I'm completely off course. Like, I can continue going this way, but man, I don't know where I'm going to wind up down there. And there came a moment where I go, I've got to turn around and get back on course. The bikers, the bicyclists, the racers didn't tell me, hey, Chris, you're off course. The race officials, they did no good. They just said, go, keep going. At that moment, I had to decide either I'm going to just pretend like I live at this house and go park, or I'm going to finish the race. I'm going to get back on course. And there's that moment for many of you where you go, I've hit rock bottom. And you're going to have to swallow your pride because nobody else is going to fix you, change you other than Jesus. And at some point, you got to go, I believe. I've tried everything else. I've tried these books. I've tried that. I've all these things. And at some point in your life and in your marriage and with your anxiety and with your fears, you got to go, Jesus, if you don't show up, I don't know what's going to happen. But there's that moment where you got to say, I believe. No one can write your life change story better than Jesus can. And so he says, I believe, and then there's this one little sentence at the end of verse 38 that's so important. Look at the end of verse 38. He says, yes, Lord, I believe. And there's that moment, and then the man said, and then he said, and he worshiped Jesus. If you've got a pen or a highlighter, those last two words, he worshiped Jesus. He worshiped Jesus. So here's what you got to grasp, and don't miss this. No one can write your life change story better than Jesus can. And when he does, don't ever take it for granted. No one can write your life change story better than Jesus can. And when he does, don't take it for granted. See, for many of us, we're on this side of a life change story, and this event happened. But as time passes, it's easier for that moment to become fuzzy or just normalized in our life story. Weeks, months, years, decades pass, and we forget what we were like on this side of the story. We forget the I was moment, And then we know Jesus changed us, but now this is just kind of normal. Don't ever forget that moment when Jesus changed your life. And all too often, it just becomes normalized and we begin to take it for granted. See, when he tells Jesus, I believed, and then the next thing is he worshiped Jesus. And that word worshiped, if you've grown up in church, you've heard that. And you go, yeah, worship. Yeah, Chris, we just did that a few minutes ago, when we sang and clapped. Let me tell you what that word worship, what it means and the emotions that it describes. And when I tell this to you, I hope you look at this word completely differently and really overlay it into your life in a new way. So I'm gonna ask you this question. How many of you in this room, you are dog people? Like you have a dog, like your dog is basically your next child, could be your favorite child, I don't know, okay? Good. Okay. No, not those dogs, like an actual dog, okay? So you got a dog, right? We've got a dog. And I'm gonna tell you my dog, type of dog, I'm gonna put this out there. I really hope it doesn't leave us in this room, so I'm just gonna keep it here. So we have a dog, and our dog is half Chihuahua, half Dachshund. The name for our dog that they have given it is a Chiweenie. And put that, yeah, so we got it from the shelter 10, almost 11 years ago, and they go, it's a Chiweenie. I go, I beg your pardon? Yeah, it's a Chiweenie, half Dachshund, half Chihuahua. And I looked at this guy, and it's a male, and I was like, dude, we got to give you a manly name. And so we named him Cowboy. Cowboy is, he's a Chiweenie, and it's, you imagine a Dachshund and Chihuahua, and that's what Cowboy is. And so Cowboy's been our dog 10, almost 11 years, and we got him when we were first married. So he was essentially, our kid. And, he slept in bed with us. He rode in my truck, and he was it. And then we had a kid, another kid, another kid. We had 4 kids. And Cowboy, he just kind of gets pushed to the bottom rung. And so Cowboy has essentially become Daniel's dog, our oldest son. And anytime Daniel walks in from school or we've been out, Cowboy runs up to Daniel, and he's got his tongue hanging out, and he's jumping up and down. And he's just happy to see him. And if you have a dog, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can come home from work or school or shopping. You could have the worst day that you've ever had. You walk in and your dog is there. He's jumping up. He's licking you. I mean, there's that moment of elation. He's so glad that you're home. This word worship, it's that same word used to describe the affection a dog shows for its owner. It's that I'm so glad you're here. I don't care what has happened, but you're here and you're in this moment. It's the same type of affection you and I should have for Jesus. Going, Jesus, you're here. And Jesus, you saved me. And Jesus, you delivered me. And Jesus, you brought me from a really low point. And Jesus, I will never, ever forget that or take it for granted. You got to understand, this man, he would never, ever forget this day for as long as he lived. He literally went from darkness to seeing things. He says he worshiped Jesus. And I think oftentimes for us, Jesus becomes just this thing that we attend. It becomes a social group that, yes, we do Jesus things on Sunday morning, and then we kind of live our own life. But don't ever forget those emotions that you felt when he changed you, when he restored your marriage, the tears that you cried, the fears and anxieties that you felt before, the lostness that you felt, and then Jesus changed you, and he shaped you, and he molded you, and he redeemed you. Don't ever take that moment for granted. But again, as time passes and years pass, it's easy to go, well, that's just part of my story. Don't ever forget when Jesus changed it. And so when was the last time that you stopped and you remember back to that moment? And you just said, Jesus, thank you, because without you, I don't know where I would be. Without you, I'd still be blind. Without you, I'd still be lost. Without you, I'd still be hopeless. But because of you, Jesus, my life is forever changed. In a very easy way to remember your life change story, that moment, in a very easy way to not take it for granted, to be so grateful for it, is to share it with somebody. To share it with somebody. And you go, well, I'm not so sure about my story. What if they don't believe me, or what if they criticize me? You've got to understand that your story is not at the mercy of others' explanations. Your story is not at the mercy of others' explanations of whether it can fit in their box or not. The blind man, his parents really didn't want to have anything to do with him. His neighbors didn't believe him. The religious people sure didn't. He goes, listen, I don't really care what you think, but here's my story. I was blind, and now I can see, and the only way that happens is because of Jesus. And so I would encourage you this week, and maybe it's been a while since you've thought back to that moment where Jesus shaped you, redeemed you, or saved you. But I would challenge you this week to share your story with one person. And it could just be a simple, I was this, and then Jesus did this for me, and now here's how my life is new or different. And maybe you write it and you put it on Facebook. Maybe you just share it with somebody at your office. But you just go, this is my story. And I'm so grateful that Jesus got a hold of me at that moment. At kids camp, at youth camp, at a men's retreat, at a women's retreat, driving down the road, sitting on the back porch and watching a sunrise or sunset. At that moment, he changed me. And can you imagine how powerful that would be if the group of us here at Mountain Lake begin to share our story through different mediums? So whether it's through Facebook or at office, we're just going to say, I was, and then Jesus, and now I am. And the type of effect that could have, not only on our community, but through Forsyth and through the state and ultimately the globe. For when there's something going on, they all have got different stories and different walks of life, but the common denominator is Jesus. The thing that holds all things together. There's a lot of different I was, and there's a lot of different now I am, but the thing that's the same in the center is Jesus, because there's a group of people that realizes no one can create a greater life-change story than Jesus. And when he does, this group of people doesn't ever take it for granted. You know, this week I was thinking about my life and my life-change stories. Man, I've just got so many of how I was and then Jesus and now I am. But there's this one that kept coming back to the center of my mind. And I became a Christian when I was 6, grew up in a pastor's home, great parents, got baptized then, and just kind of, lived life. I wasn't crazy rebel, but I just kind of lived life and then grew up to middle school and high school, went to college. And the problem is, my life, the center of my life was Chris. It was Chris. Chris did whatever Chris wanted to do. Chris thought Chris hung the moon. Chris thought that Chris could do no wrong. And so Chris was the center of Chris's life. And then this summer between my sophomore and junior year of college, God got a hold of my life in a very radical and a very painful way. That summer, and what had happened is it started spring break. Spring break at college, and I go snow skiing with a group of friends. It's about day 2 or day 3 of the trip. We're snow skiing, and I'm in a snowboard park on snow skis. And someone says, why don't you go do this jump? And, again, Chris was invincible. Chris could do no wrong. So sure. So I go down, and I hit a jump, and I come down. And when I come down, I hear a pop in my lower back. And what felt like a hot knife went in the lower back. And what had happened is I had shattered a lower vertebrae in my back. Just hit and it compressed and just shattered out. And I remember to this day laying there flat on my back, and the doctor holds up the x-ray, and he says, you shattered a vertebrae. And he looks at me, looks at my dad, he goes, there's a 50-50 chance that people with these injuries ever walk again. Half the time the vertebrae shatters into the spinal cord and you're paralyzed, the other half it shatters away and you can walk. He goes, fortunately for you, Chris, it shattered away and you're going to be missing half a vertebrae. He says, but you'll be able to walk again. And that happened through spring break, and so for the rest of the school year, I was flat on my back, then I go home. And that summer is when God began to radically change my life. And the person that he used in my life was a senior citizen who was 5'5" and weighed 150 pounds soaking wet. And that person that he used was my grandfather. And I began to work for him. That summer he was in construction, and so I tell people my physical rehab after that broken back was swinging a hammer for my grandfather. And so I did that summer, and that summer God began to speak and to change into my life and my heart. And I began to work for him, and I think I got a picture of him up there. Let me show you this picture up there. Yeah, that's my grandfather right there. I began to work for him, and that summer, that guy right there on the right began to speak into this young man's heart on the left. 20-year-old college kid who was living at the center of his own life began to say, now here's how and why Jesus should be at the center of your life, Chris. And here's what it looks like to be a Christian husband and a Christian father and a Christian man. Chris, here's what it looks like to be a man of integrity and a man of character. And Chris, here's what it looks like to have patience in life. And Chris, here's what it looks like when Jesus is at the center of your life and not you. And that summer, God began to radically shape my life. And that moment as a 20-year-old kid is when God got a hold of my life and when Jesus became the center. And so my story was, I was at the center of my own life. And then Jesus used a snow skiing accident and my grandfather and a summer of manual labor to begin to change me. And now Jesus is at the center of my life, and he's at the center of my marriage, and he's at the center of my family, and at the center of my work. And I, like so many of you, the farther away you get, I mean, that was 15 years ago, and I look back, and it almost just becomes normalized, but I just begin to think and going, that moment in my life, that snow skiing accident, and that summer, and that whole time frame was when Jesus completely reversed and pulls Chris out of the center and put Jesus at the center. And that's my story. You know, many of you go, well, yeah, that's a nice story, Chris, but you weren't addicted to drugs and you weren't in jail. And no, but it's my story. And you've got your story. And maybe that's yours. You were addicted to drugs, or you're in jail, or maybe you're a workaholic. And you worked 80, 90, 100 hours a week and sacrificed your family. And then Jesus gets a hold of you. And now it's God and family and career as a distant third. Maybe for many of you struggle with anxiety, and then you realize that Jesus came to save you, and now you have peace that passes all understanding. What is your story, and when was the last time that you shared it with somebody? Because you have no idea how powerful your life change story could be for somebody else. I was, and now I am, and at the center of it all, it's Jesus. Let me pray for us. With every head bowed and every eye closed, let me speak to those people that are on the side of the story going, I am in need of a life change. I've tried everything else. I've tried money, I've tried fame, I've tried popularity, I've tried the corner office, but nothing seems to last. And I'm here to tell you that the only thing that will produce lasting life change in your heart and your mind is a relationship with Jesus and making him the Savior and the Lord of your life. And if you've never done that, I'm giving you an opportunity to do that right now with every head bowed and every eye closed. I don't care if this is your first time or you're just checking out church, but maybe you're that person I was talking about where you have it all good on the outside and you're polished, but on the inside you are a wreck and you're a mess. And only you know that between you and your Heavenly Father. And if you've never placed your faith in Jesus Christ and what he did on the cross, and the fact that he died for your sins, and the fact that God raised him from the dead, if you've never placed your faith in him, I'm going to lead you in a simple prayer. And there's nothing super spiritual about these words. It's just a confession of what's going on in your heart. If you've never trusted in Jesus, just repeat this simple prayer after me. Mean it from the depths of your heart. Just say something like this. Just say, Lord Jesus, I know I'm a sinner, and without you, I cannot get into heaven. So come into my heart. Be Lord of my life from this day forward. Thank you for my salvation and for being at the center of my life. And for the rest of you that you've had that moment, and just at this time, I would encourage you not to ever take it for granted, to go back to that moment and relive those emotions and those feelings where Jesus completely changed you. And say, Jesus, thank you. If it were not for you, I don't know where I would be. I was blind and now I can see, and it's all because of Jesus. Lord, I thank you for being present here today. I thank you for the life change stories that you have written in so many of our lives and those that you will continue to write in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. And Lord, my prayer for all of us is that when that happens, we don't ever, ever, ever take it for granted. But we understand the source is in you and you alone. We love you, Jesus. Ask all of these things in your name.